Karen sent fake HOA police to arrest me, but I'm a US Marshal. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. I had just moved into the kind of neighborhood people picture when they think of a quiet, peaceful life. Perfectly trimmed hedges, pastel-colored houses lined up like they were copied and pasted, and friendly welcome signs hanging from almost every porch. It was the kind of place that looked like it had never seen a bad day. A step away from chaos and maybe, just maybe, a step closer to peace. After years of working high-risk assignments as a US Marshal, I figured I'd earned a little silence. My house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac with a wide driveway, a neat front lawn, and just enough room to finally breathe. No sirens, no flashing lights, no last-minute calls pulling me into the field. Just birds, barbecues, and the occasional dog barking in the distance. That's what I thought I was signing up for anyway. The Homeowners Association, or the HOA as everyone called it, was quick to introduce themselves. A typed-out welcome package showed up in my mailbox the day after I moved in, complete with color-coded guidelines on everything from lawn maintenance to the exact shade of beige your house trim should be painted. It felt a bit strict, sure, but nothing too surprising. I'd lived under stricter rules before, and I didn't mind structure I could handle. Still, there was something a little off. A little too polished. Every lawn looked freshly cut at the same height, not a single weed in sight. Even the trash cans seemed to be positioned at the same angle on pickup day. People waved, but not for too long. Smiles, but only from a distance. Conversations felt rehearsed, like they were saying just enough and not a word more. And then there was her. I noticed her on the second day, just past sunset, standing near the sidewalk in front of my driveway. She didn't introduce herself, didn't say a word. Just stared at the moving truck while pretending to scroll through something on her phone. Blonde bob, sunglasses, yes, even at dusk, and a notepad tucked under her arm. You know the type, clipboard energy, passive-aggressive posture, and the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The neighborhood already seemed tightly wound, but she took it a step further. I didn't know her name yet, but something told me I'd be seeing a lot more of her. She walked the block like she owned it. Watching. Noticing. I caught her peering through people's fences, taking photos of garden gnomes that were too tacky, and measuring grass with what I swear was a literal ruler. I'd worked with agents who could profile a suspect in under 5 minutes. I could feel it in my gut. This woman had a file on every neighbor, and she was building one on me too. I didn't say anything, not at first. I dealt with worse. But the thing about instincts, especially mine, they don't lie. Something about this place was hiding under the surface. And something about her was going to be a problem. It happened on a Thursday morning, one of those slow, calm starts to the day where the coffee's just hot enough and the breeze carries the scent of someone mowing their lawn a few houses down. I stepped outside to grab the mail, still in sweats and bare feet on the driveway, when I noticed the white envelope taped to my front door. Not mailed. Taped. Centered perfectly. Like whoever placed it there took the time to make sure it was eye-level, dead center, and impossible to miss. No return address. Just a bold header, notice of violation. I raised an eyebrow. My car was in the garage. My trash bins were tucked in. The lawn? Still green and trimmed, barely had time to grow since I moved in. I opened the letter expecting maybe some kind of neighborhood welcome checklist. Instead, I got a full-page write-up citing me for unauthorized decorative elements on porch area. Decorative elements? I looked up instinctively. The only thing out front was a small wooden US flag plaque leaning beside the door, something I'd carried from house to house for years. It wasn't flashy. Not political. Just a simple piece that meant something to me. Apparently, it meant something else to the HOA. At the bottom of the page, in all caps, was a warning: failure to comply within 72 hours may result in additional fines. I stood there, still holding the letter, coffee forgotten, wondering if this was how things worked around here. No knock. No conversation. Just a formal notice, like I was already part of some game I never agreed to play. Later that afternoon, I went down to the HOA office, a small converted room inside the community clubhouse, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. A woman at the front desk handed me a printout of the porch presentation policy, complete with diagrams and measurements. I asked casually who filed the complaint. She hesitated, said she wasn't technically allowed to say, but then let slip something about Karen being our community standards liaison. Of course it was. I walked out and glanced around the parking lot, half expecting to see her there, measuring bumper distances or snapping a photo of someone's slightly crooked mailbox. I didn't, but I could feel her eyes somewhere. Watching. Taking notes. Probably already drafting the next violation. Back at home, I removed the flag plaque and placed it inside the entryway, leaning it against the wall where no one could call it unauthorized. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. It wasn't about the flag. It was about the fact that someone, Karen, had taken the time to walk up to my house, document something harmless, and push it through an official channel without a word. That level of precision doesn't come from neighborly concern. That's control. And she was clearly used to getting her way. It didn't take long for things to go from strict to personal. At first, it was small stuff, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. A printed note left on my mailbox telling me my grass was a quarter-inch too long, with a smiley face at the end like it was meant to be helpful. A knock on my door around 7 a.m. one Saturday to remind me that my trash bins were still visible from the street even though it wasn't even trash day. She said it softly, through a polite smile that didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. I gave her a nod. Said, "Thanks, I'll take care of it." And I did. But it wasn't about the bins. She started walking her dog past my house more often even though she lived on the other side of the neighborhood. A tiny white fluff ball that didn't bark, didn't sniff, just trotted alongside her while she scanned my property like she was inspecting a crime scene. Every time I opened my garage or stepped outside, I'd catch her watching from the sidewalk, phone in hand, pretending to check messages but always facing me just a little too directly. Her presence became routine, background noise with an edge. It was a week later when I noticed the tone in the neighborhood shift. Neighbors I had waved to during move-ins stopped waving back. One of them, a quiet guy with a blue pickup truck who lived 2 doors down, stopped parking on my side of the street. I caught him and his wife whispering on their porch when I came back from a grocery run. They went inside as soon as they saw me. Another family that used to let their kids ride bikes past my driveway suddenly started walking them around the block the long way, avoiding my house altogether. It didn't make sense at first. But then I found the flyer. Folded, dropped in the grass near my front steps. A poorly written community alert that warned about a new neighbor who has yet to fully align with our HOA values. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. There were quotes from HOA guidelines, references to government types who think rules don't apply to them, and a line that read, "We must stand together to protect the spirit of our neighborhood." Karen's fingerprints were all over it. I'd seen vendettas before. I'd seen people let power twist into obsession. But this was something different, slower, quieter, more methodical. It wasn't about one flag plaque or one rule violation. It was about control. About making me feel unwelcome. About pushing until I broke character. But I didn't. I kept mowing my lawn, kept waving to the neighbors who didn't wave back. I showed up at every HOA meeting, sat in the back, listened. I even offered suggestions for community safety, calmly, respectfully. I stayed polite. Steady. Because the one thing I learned after years in the field is that people like Karen don't know what to do with calm. They feed off anger, off reaction. And I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. Still, the air in the neighborhood felt heavier with each passing day. And deep down, I could feel it building, something bigger, something planned. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was just afternoon on a Wednesday, warm, bright, and uneventful. I'd been home most of the morning, fixing a loose hinge on the backyard gate, sipping iced tea between trips to the toolbox. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Just a quiet day in suburbia, the kind that used to feel normal before things started to spiral. I heard the knock before I saw them. 3 sharp raps on the front door. No doorbell. Just that steady, unmistakable rhythm. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over, glancing through the peephole, and that's when something felt off. 2 men stood outside, both wearing dark uniforms. Generic black shirts tucked into cargo pants, with small gold badges clipped to their belts. Not official issued. No name tags. No body cams. No radios. One held a clipboard, the other stood back with arms crossed, legs wide, trying too hard to look intimidating. "Sir," the one with the clipboard said as soon as I opened the door, "we're here on behalf of the HOA Compliance Enforcement Division. We need you to step outside." HOA Compliance Enforcement Division? That doesn't exist. I didn't answer. Just looked at him, keeping my expression flat, neutral. I scanned them both, no sidearms, but bulges under the jackets where props might be. Patches stitched onto the sleeves, vaguely official looking, but with no agency name. Like a Halloween costume that cost just enough to raise questions. "Step outside," the first one repeated, firmer now. "We have a report of noncompliance and unauthorized residence behavior." I tilted my head slightly. Unauthorized residence behavior? That doesn't sound like a real term. They exchanged a glance. The kind of look that says the script wasn't going as planned. And right behind them, I saw her Karen standing on the sidewalk, arms folded, sunglasses on, watching. Her lips were curled into the tiniest smirk, like she already saw this ending in her favor. I stepped out slowly, closing the door behind me, hands relaxed by my sides. "You boys have ID?" "Excuse me," the taller one asked. "Credentials," I said. "Badges. Agency cards. Paperwork signed by a judge. If you're here to arrest someone, you'd better have the proper authority." The clipboard guy hesitated, then started flipping pages, pretending to search for something. There was nothing in that stack. Just printed copies of HOA rules, color-coded and highlighted like someone had spent a little too much time with a highlighter and not enough with the law. "You're interfering with an official HOA enforcement action," the other guy said. His voice had that forced edge, like someone trying to sound commanding but missing the weight behind it. I took a step closer, calm and measured. "Let me explain something to you. I'm a U.S. Marshal. Which means if you were impersonating law enforcement on private property, you're looking at multiple felonies. And I don't care if Karen sent you, the HOA signed off on it, or you think you're just following orders, you're going to want to walk away now." Silence. They froze. Just for a second. Then the guy with the clipboard coughed and muttered something about a misunderstanding. They turned briskly, walking down the driveway with stiff strides like they couldn't leave fast enough. Karen watched them pass, her expression souring as the plan unraveled right in front of her. She didn't say a word. Just turned around and disappeared back down the sidewalk like none of it had happened. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of suburban life returning, lawnmowers, birds whined through the trees. No sirens. No cuffs. No arrests. Not today. The moment they walked off my property, I knew this wasn't something I could just let slide. It wasn't about pride or even the personal insult, it was about how bold the whole stunt was. Sending in a couple of rent-a-cops dressed up to intimidate me on my own front porch? That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was premeditated. I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my notepad. Years of fieldwork had trained me to notice the little things most people overlook, and today had been full of them. The badge clips didn't match. One had an upside-down patch sewn on. The language they used, unauthorized residence behavior, wasn't even close to legal jargon. And that clipboard? All HOA policy, not a single legal document among the stack. I started digging. First, I checked the HOA's website, not much there, just meeting dates, landscaping policies, and a generic mission statement about protecting the harmony of the community. No mention of a compliance enforcement division. No record of contractors or third-party security. I searched the names of the HOA board members and found a few personal LinkedIn pages, all pretty normal. But then I hit something interesting. A listing in a local business registry tied to a security firm, shady reviews, no official licensing, and an address that led to an empty lot on Google Maps. That was enough to raise red flags. I picked up the phone. I called an old friend from the Marshal service, Jack, someone who still worked internal investigations. Gave him a quick rundown, skipping the HOA drama and sticking to the facts. 2 men impersonating law enforcement, coordinated through a private entity, no official orders or legal grounds. Jack didn't laugh. He just asked for names and said he'd run them through a few systems. Next, I contacted a lawyer I'd worked with before, Bethany Torres, sharp as a blade and twice as precise. When I told her what happened, she asked for photos, documents, names, anything I had. I sent her the HOA violation letters, a copy of the community alert flyer I'd found in my yard, and a blurry phone snap I'd taken of one of the fake badges as they turned to leave. She called back the next day with her voice low and serious. "This isn't just harassment," she said. "It borders on criminal conspiracy. Impersonation of law enforcement, trespassing, intimidation. You've got more than enough here to make a case. Especially if the HOA authorized it." That was the key. Karen might have pulled the strings, but someone on that board had to co-sign her nonsense. No one gets 2 fake officers to walk up to a house without someone approving a budget, making a call, or looking the other way. And I was going to find out who. I spent the next few evenings quietly knocking on doors, ones that hadn't turned cold yet. A few neighbors were willing to talk, especially the ones who'd felt Karen's iron grip before. One mentioned a rumor that she'd hired a private neighborhood safety team. Another said he saw her hosting meetings at her house that weren't listed in the official HOA calendar. One woman, older and clearly fed up, just rolled her eyes and said, "Karen thinks she runs a gated community. Problem is, no one ever gave her the gate." The picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was a campaign. Coordinated, planned, and executed by people who thought they were above the law, or worse, untouchable because of the little patch of suburbia they controlled. I printed out everything. Every violation notice. Every email. Every photo. I labeled and timestamped it all. I wasn't ready to go public, not yet, but I was ready to walk into that next HOA meeting with both eyes open and every card in my hand. Because now I wasn't just dealing with Karen the busybody. I was dealing with Karen the ringleader. And it was time to bring some light into her little empire of shadows. The monthly HOA board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that tried its best to feel welcoming. With a few potted plants in the corners and a folding table draped in a vinyl tablecloth at the front. Rows of plastic chairs faced the board and most were already filled when I walked in. Residents murmured quietly, holding coffee cups and printed agendas. A few glanced my way. Others didn't. Karen was already seated at the head of the board table wearing a deep blue cardigan like she was preparing to give a TED Talk. Her face was unreadable, but she didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked prepared, confident, like someone who'd rehearsed every excuse 3 times in front of a mirror. I didn't sit. I stood in the back, waded through the first few agenda items, budget adjustments, tree trimming schedules, a new paint palette proposal for shutters until they opened the floor for member concerns. I raised my hand, calm and steady. The room quieted a bit. Karen gave a tight smile. Yes. Mr. Lawson, is it? That's right, I said, stepping forward. I pulled a folder from under my arm and laid it flat on the edge of the board's table. I have some concerns that go beyond lawn care. There was a pause, small but noticeable. I opened the folder and started placing documents out like cards on a poker table. Copies of the fake violation letters. A printout of the fake badge with a blown-up image of its mismatched seal. A record of the security company Karen had used, including their revoked business license. A photo of the 2 men leaving my property with a time-stamped screenshot from my front door camera. And finally, the flyer. I looked straight at the board. You have a board member, I said slowly, who authorized 2 men with no legal credentials to impersonate officers and attempt an arrest on private property. You have a board that either knew and said nothing or didn't know and failed to stop her. That's not oversight. That's complicity. There was a silence so heavy it seemed to suck the air out of the room. One board member, a man with graying hair and a constantly nodding head, cleared his throat. Mr. Lawson, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. We don't have any authority to conduct arrests, and we certainly didn't. You approved a security contract, I cut in, placing the business registry printout in front of him. Right here. Signed 3 months ago. By Karen Mills. I turned to her. Your signature's on it. Same day you delivered my second violation letter. Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't blink. That contract was for neighborhood safety. Patrols, not arrests. And we never claimed they were police officers. They claimed it, I said, pulling out a transcript of my conversation with one of the imposters. Verbatim. We're here to detain you. That's impersonation of law enforcement. A felony. You don't get to say you didn't know when you sent them. You don't get to hide behind vague titles when things go sideways. A woman on the board, someone I hadn't heard speak yet, leaned forward, glancing through the documents. Karen, is this true? Karen didn't answer. She stared at me like she was trying to find a crack, a weakness, a way to flip the narrative. But there was nothing left to flip. Another board member tried to intervene. Let's not jump to conclusions here, I stepped in closer, my voice quiet but firm. This isn't a conclusion. It's evidence. You let personal bias turn into targeted harassment. You let one of your own weaponize the HOA, use neighborhood rules like they were laws. And you used fear as leverage. That ends tonight. The room was silent again, this time longer. No coughs, no murmurs. Just a dozen people trying to figure out which side of the line they were standing on. I looked at each of them. I'm not asking for a gesture. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm demanding accountability. Because next time it might not be someone like me standing on the porch. It might be someone who doesn't know their rights. Someone who gets hurt. I collected my folder, calm as ever, and turned to leave. Let them sit with IT. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the end of the week, 2 official notices had been delivered to the HOA office, one from the county attorney's office and one from a civil rights organization that had caught wind of the case through a colleague of mine. Impersonating law enforcement was no small matter. And once investigators started poking around, it became clear this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. The men who showed up at my house were the first to face charges. They were arrested for impersonation, unlawful detainment, and trespassing. One of them flipped within 48 hours, giving a full statement that linked his appearance at my home directly to Karen. He claimed she'd told him it was a soft enforcement visit just to scare me into compliance. No one expected an actual marshal to be on the other side of that door. Then came the fines. The HOA was hit with a hefty civil penalty north of $50,000 for operating beyond its legal scope and authorizing unauthorized security activities. Their liability insurance didn't cover criminal activity. The board scrambled to pay it, and rumors spread that annual HOA dues were about to spike to cover the fallout. That didn't go over well. Karen was removed from the board in an emergency vote. She didn't go quietly. At the meeting, she accused everyone of betrayal, claiming she was only trying to protect the values of the neighborhood. Her voice cracked when she said it, but not from regret, more from disbelief that no one stood up for her this time. I watched from the back row, arms crossed. She never looked my way. 2 residents filed private lawsuits against the HOA for similar harassment incidents in the past, smaller cases that had been brushed off until now. One of them, an elderly man who lived across the street, told me later he'd gotten fined for having a wreath on his door too early in the season. He smiled as he said it, but his voice was heavy with resentment. "I just paid it," he told me. Thought that's how it worked. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Some people started speaking to me again, cautiously at first. Others avoided me completely, like being associated with me might bring more trouble. There were those who thanked me quietly in passing, and others who still glared from behind their blinds like I'd brought shame to their perfect little cul-de-sac. Truth is, not everyone wants justice. Some people just want peace, even if it's built on silence. I didn't celebrate. There was no moment of victory. No parade or neighborhood barbecue to mark the shift. Just paperwork, press calls, and the occasional question from someone in law enforcement circles asking if I was planning to run for some local office. I wasn't. I had no interest in politics. I just wanted what was right to be made clear and enforced. Part of me felt relief. The pressure was gone. I could open my front door without wondering who was watching, walk to the mailbox without thinking about some new citation taped to the lid. But part of me also felt tired, like I'd cleaned up someone else's mess and all I had left was the weight of it. This neighborhood was supposed to be a break. Instead, it became a different kind of battleground. Still, I couldn't ignore what had changed. The fear in people's faces was gone, replaced by something else. Awareness. Maybe even resolve. The kind of shift that doesn't happen loud but sticks around for a long time. Karen disappeared from the neighborhood almost as quickly as she had once dominated it. One day she was at the center of every board meeting, clipboard in hand, issuing reminders and writing policy drafts like she was running for suburban mayor. The next, her porch was empty. Her car, always parked at the perfect angle, gone. Curtains drawn, mailbox unopened. The hum of her constant presence had gone silent. Word spread fast, as it always does in communities like ours. After her removal from the HOA board and the legal heat that followed, she'd stepped down from her job as a compliance officer at a local property management firm. Turns out her employers weren't thrilled to see her name in news articles tied to impersonation charges and abuse of power. No charges stuck to her directly, not criminal ones, but the civil lawsuits had her named in enough affidavits to keep any attorney busy for months. Neighbors who used to speak to her daily stopped calling. A few tried to defend her at first, saying she was just upholding the rules or that she meant well but went too far. One woman even suggested she was misunderstood, as if impersonating police and trying to intimidate someone into silence could somehow be chalked up to good intentions. Others weren't so kind. People who had once looked the other way started sharing their own stories, small grievances, all dismissed at the time but suddenly taking on a new light. The time Karen told a single mother her child's toys on the lawn lowered property values. The time she knocked on an elderly couple's door to report a non-regulation bird feeder. The emails. The passive-aggressive meeting minutes. The unofficial neighborhood watch reports she used to keep. Her circle shrank fast. The people who clung to power through her authority now kept their distance, as if her downfall might rub off on them. She became a cautionary tale, the kind people whisper about over fences, just loud enough to be heard but never quite direct enough to be called gossip. I never went out of my way to speak with her after that night at the HOA meeting. We hadn't said a word to each other since. I saw her once, just once, standing outside her house with a cardboard box under one arm, locking the front door. No sunglasses this time. No clipboard. Just her, looking smaller than I remembered, like someone who finally realized the world wouldn't bend for them the way it used to. I didn't feel triumph. Just a strange kind of stillness. People aren't born villains. I'd seen that too many times in my career to believe otherwise. Karen probably started out trying to keep things neat, to bring some order to the chaos. But control is a funny thing, it doesn't stay small for long. Give it room and it grows teeth. Maybe she convinced herself it was all for the good of the neighborhood. Maybe she thought someone had to take charge and she was just the one brave enough to do it. But intention doesn't erase harm. And good motives don't justify illegal actions. I wasn't angry at her anymore, not really. What she did was wrong and she had to face the consequences. But as I watched her walk away from the house she once ruled like a kingdom, all I felt was a kind of quiet understanding. Some people get lost in their need for control. Others just get out before it consumes them. She didn't. It wasn't long after Karen's departure that things began to feel different. The heavy tension that had hung in the air for months started to dissipate and the neighborhood began to settle into a quieter rhythm. I found myself standing at the mailbox one afternoon, just waiting for the familiar hum of the place to sink back in. The sound of lawnmowers in the distance. A child's laughter echoing down the street. The soft shuffle of neighbors walking their dogs. I had half expected to leave, to find some other place where I could have a fresh start, somewhere untouched by all the drama. But something kept me here. Maybe it was the house itself, which, despite everything, still felt like home. Maybe it was the thought that the neighborhood needed someone to help guide it through the mess Karen had left behind. So I stayed. I decided I wasn't going to be just another anonymous face on the block. I'd made my mark already, sure, but it wasn't enough. The community had been fractured, and if I had any part in fixing it, I wasn't going to just walk away. I started small. One evening, I saw the neighbor across the street, Eleanor, the one who'd had issues with Karen's property value complaints, sitting on her porch, staring at her garden. I went over, a friendly nod as I crossed the street, and asked if she needed help with her new rosebush. A simple gesture. No agenda. Just a chance to reconnect. She smiled, genuine, not forced, and we ended up talking for an hour about gardening tips and life before the HOA drama. Eleanor told me she'd felt like an outsider here for years, always afraid of stepping out of line, of making a mistake in the eyes of the HOA. But now, there was a sense of relief in her voice. She felt like things were finally opening up again, that the community wasn't just about rules, it was about people. As the weeks passed, I did the same with others. I helped with yard work for a few, offered to pick up groceries for an elderly couple down the block, and even attended a couple of community events that had felt too stifled before. Potlucks. Block parties. Things I had avoided when Karen was at the helm, afraid of the judgment that might come with them. And slowly, things began to change. More people started to wave when they saw me. A few dropped by to chat about nothing in particular, just to reconnect. The air of suspicion had lifted, and it wasn't just because Karen was gone, it was because people finally felt like they had a voice again. They could disagree, they could speak up, and they didn't have to live in fear of a neighborhood watch system that was more about control than protection. I spent more time with Jack, catching up on old cases, drinking beer on my porch in the evenings. I even started to build a rapport with a few of the new neighbors' families who had moved in after the whole Karen debacle, people who were just looking for a place to live and who hadn't been involved in the mess. It was easy to see that at their core, the community wasn't broken. It had just been misled, pushed into paranoia by someone who believed they knew best. One afternoon, I was out in the front yard, trimming the hedges, when I saw a small group of kids playing catch in the street. They looked like they were having fun, no concerns about lawns or property lines. Just kids being kids. It made me smile. I looked up as a neighbor, Henry, waved from across the street. I'd helped him fix his fence a couple of weekends ago, and now there he was, walking over with a fresh six-pack of soda. "Got some time?" he called out. "Figured we could talk about some of those home improvements you mentioned." I wiped my brow and nodded. "Yeah, I've got time." He tossed me a can and sat down next to me on the porch. "You know," he said, taking a sip, "I thought about leaving a few times. After all that mess with Karen. Just didn't feel right sticking around, you know?" I nodded. "I get it. But sometimes it's worth staying, even when it's hard. You can't always control what happens, but you can make the most of it when things start to turn around." Henry looked over at the kids again, and I followed his gaze. "You've done more than just turn it around," he said. "You've given this place a chance to be what it was always supposed to be. A community." I sat back, feeling the weight of his words. Maybe this wasn't just about justice after all. Maybe it was about something deeper, about connection, about reclaiming spaces that had been taken over by fear and reminding people that they mattered. I looked at the sunset, feeling the cool breeze sweep across the yard. The neighborhood was finally at peace, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it too. There was work still to be done, relationships to rebuild, but the foundation was there. And this time, it was one built on respect, not control. Maybe it was the beginning of something good. Maybe this time, the community would stay strong. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize just how much this situation taught me, not only about Karen and the neighborhood, but about the nature of power and the responsibility that comes with it. Power, even in its smallest forms, can be intoxicating. Whether it's in a small community association or on a grand scale, when unchecked, it can quickly morph into something corrosive. People become blinded by their need to control, to dominate. And once they cross that line, the consequences can ripple out, affecting not just the individual but the entire community. The story with Karen isn't just about one person abusing their position, it's a cautionary tale about how easily it can happen when no one speaks up, when the community allows even the smallest injustices to go unnoticed or unchallenged. The rules that are meant to protect us can easily be twisted when they fall into the wrong hands, and it's on all of us to keep an eye on the systems we rely on. At the same time, it's important to remember that standing up for what's right doesn't have to mean making a big scene or taking down the system. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing when something's wrong and deciding to say something about it, to act with integrity even when it's inconvenient. It's about holding ourselves and others accountable, not out of a desire for revenge, but for the greater good of everyone involved. This story could have ended very differently. I could have walked away, left the neighborhood, and let the cycle continue. But instead, I chose to stay and fight, not just for my own peace, but for the peace of the people around me. Because when we allow things like this to go unchecked, we're all complicit. Inaction isn't neutral, it's a choice that lets injustice persist. As you watch this, I want to encourage you to think about your own communities. Whether it's a neighborhood, a workplace, or any group you're a part of, ask yourself, do you see things that need to change? Are there rules being enforced unfairly? Are there voices that aren't being heard? Don't wait for someone else to step up. Sometimes it takes one person to make a difference. But that one person could be you. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand up to power, even when it felt uncomfortable? How did you handle it? What lessons did you learn along the way? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going, because the more we talk about these issues, the more we can help each other navigate them in our own lives. Remember, justice is something we all have a stake in. And we all have the power to make sure it's not only served but protected.